I was 22 years old when life hit me with a series of challenges I never expected. At that point, I had always believed that life was something you could plan out, that with hard work, persistence, and a little luck, you could make all your dreams come true. But that year, I learned that life doesn't always go according to plan, and sometimes it's not about how hard you fight for something. It's about how you rise after everything falls apart. It all started when I was still in college, working part-time in a small cafe to help pay for my expenses. I had a tight-knit group of friends, a supportive family, and a clear vision of what I wanted my future to look like. But one day, everything changed. I had been feeling increasingly drained, physically, mentally, and emotionally, but I couldn't pinpoint why. I brushed it off, thinking it was just the usual stress of college life. But then, I began to struggle with things I had once easily managed. I found it hard to get out of bed in the morning. I had difficulty concentrating on my studies, and I felt a deep sense of sadness that I couldn't explain. I felt isolated in a way I never had before. My friends noticed the change, but I didn't want to burden them with my feelings. I thought I should be able to handle this on my own. But the harder I tried to push through it, the worse I felt. One evening, I found myself sitting alone in my dorm room, staring at my reflection in the mirror, and for the first time in a long while, I realized something was wrong. I wasn't just tired or stressed. I was overwhelmed. I had been ignoring the signs that my mental and emotional well-being were deteriorating, and it was then that I realized I couldn't keep going the way I was. I took the first step by seeking help. It wasn't easy for me to admit that I needed support, but I reached out to a counselor at my university. That conversation marked the beginning of my healing process. I was diagnosed with anxiety and depression, and while it was difficult to face the reality of what I was going through, I also felt a sense of relief. Finally, there was a name for what I was experiencing, and I wasn't alone. Through therapy, I began to learn the importance of self-compassion. For so long, I had been my own harshest critic. I pushed myself beyond my limits, believing that if I wasn't constantly achieving or pushing forward, I was failing. But I soon realized that taking care of myself wasn't a luxury, it was a necessity. Self-compassion means giving yourself permission to rest, to acknowledge your struggles, and to understand that you don't have to be perfect to be worthy of love and care. The more I worked with my therapist, the more I began to understand how much of my self-worth had been tied to external achievements. I had always thought that success, validation, and happiness came from external sources, grades, job opportunities, social recognition. But I learned that true happiness comes from within. We cannot pour from an empty cup. I had spent so much time caring for others and working hard to meet everyone else's expectations that I had forgotten to care for myself. I had neglected my own mental and emotional health, and I had placed my worth in the hands of external validation. One of the most powerful realizations I had during therapy was that it's okay to not be okay. For so long, I had avoided facing my emotions, thinking that if I ignored them, they would go away. But I learned that emotions, no matter how difficult or overwhelming, are valid. They are part of being human, and when we ignore them, we only make them stronger. As I began to heal, I learned to slow down and pay attention to my emotional needs. I started setting boundaries in my personal life, saying no when I needed to, taking breaks when I felt exhausted, and finding moments of quiet to reflect on my feelings. I realized that I didn't have to be constantly productive to be valuable. There was beauty in rest, in taking time to recharge, and in embracing the stillness of my own thoughts. During this time, I also reconnected with my passion for writing. Writing had always been a source of comfort for me, but I had neglected it over the years as I became consumed by the pressures of school and work. I began journaling again, pouring my thoughts onto the page without judgment. It was liberating to express myself without worrying about grammar or structure. Writing became my way of processing my feelings and understanding myself better. It was a way to release the pent-up emotions that had been weighing me down. The more I embraced self-compassion, the more I began to see the world differently. I learned to be kinder to myself. When I stumbled or made mistakes, I didn't criticize myself as harshly as I used to. Instead, I acknowledged the mistake, forgave myself, and moved forward. I learned that life isn't about being perfect. It's about being resilient, learning from our mistakes, and continuing to grow. It wasn't an overnight transformation. Healing took time, and there were days when I felt like I was taking 2 steps forward and 1 step back. But each day, I got a little bit stronger. I learned that healing is a process, not a destination. I didn't have to have all the answers right away. The important thing was that I was taking small steps toward recovery, toward reclaiming my life. Eventually, I began to open up to my friends about what I'd been going through. I realized that I didn't have to carry my burden alone. True friends are the ones who are there to support you, even in your darkest moments. And when I shared my struggles with them, I found that many of them had faced similar challenges. Talking about it didn't make me weak. It made me human. And in that vulnerability, I found connection, support, and love. One of the most beautiful aspects of this experience was that through my struggle, I learned how to lean on others without feeling ashamed. I had spent so much of my life trying to be self-sufficient, to handle everything on my own, but I came to understand that asking for help is a sign of strength, not weakness. It takes courage to admit when you're struggling, and even more courage to reach out and accept help from others. Through that vulnerability, I found the support I needed to heal. As I moved forward in my recovery, I learned to prioritize my mental health just as I would my physical health. I began practicing mindfulness, taking long walks in nature, and doing yoga to help manage my stress and anxiety. These small acts of self-care became daily rituals that helped me stay grounded and balanced. By the time I graduated from college, I had come to terms with the fact that life isn't always going to be easy. There will be times when things don't go according to plan, and there will be moments of pain and uncertainty. But I also realized that I'm stronger than I ever thought. I had learned to face my challenges with resilience and to trust that, no matter what happens, I can handle it. I had learned that self-worth isn't something that's given to you by others. It's something you cultivate within yourself. And most importantly, I had learned that taking care of myself is the most important thing I can do for my future. Looking back on everything, I realized that the challenges I faced during that difficult year were not the end of my story. They were the beginning of a new chapter. I've learned that life is unpredictable, but it's also full of opportunities for growth, healing, and self-discovery. We all go through tough times, but it's what we learn from them that shapes us. Healing is not linear, and it's okay to take your time. It's okay to ask for help, to take breaks, and to focus on your mental health. If I could offer one piece of advice to anyone going through a difficult time, it would be this. Don't be afraid to take care of yourself. Don't be afraid to rest, to heal, and to ask for support. You are worth the time and the effort it takes to nurture your own well-being. You don't have to be perfect, and you don't have to have everything figured out right now. What matters is that you keep going. Keep growing, and keep believing in your own strength. As I continued my journey toward healing, I noticed subtle yet profound changes in myself. I began to embrace a more positive outlook, something that had been hard to do when I was engulfed in feelings of helplessness. It wasn't an instant transformation, but rather a gradual process, where I learned to embrace each moment, good or bad, as part of my own growth. I started to appreciate the smallest things that brought me joy. Watching a sunrise, a good conversation with a friend, the feeling of completing a task, or simply enjoying a quiet evening alone. One day, while I was out for a walk in the park, I stopped and realized something important. I hadn't felt that sense of stillness and peace in a long time. I had been so caught up in the whirlwind of thoughts, fears, and expectations that I had forgotten what it felt like to just be. This moment was a turning point. It was in this quiet space that I began to understand the value of mindfulness, the practice of staying present in the moment and letting go of the overwhelming need to control everything. Mindfulness became an essential part of my healing. I started practicing it daily, whether through deep breathing exercises or simply focusing on the sensations around me. hearing the wind rustling through the trees, feeling the sun on my skin, or noticing the simple beauty of the world around me. This practice helped me reconnect with the present and let go of past regrets and future worries. I learned that the present moment is all we really have, and that it's okay to let go of the past and stop obsessing over the future. As I became more mindful, I also began to set clear intentions for my life. I stopped living in survival mode, constantly reacting to circumstances. Instead, I took control of my choices. I began to define what I wanted out of life, not based on societal expectations, but based on what felt right to me. It wasn't an easy process, as I had to question old beliefs and habits that no longer served me, but it was incredibly freeing. Self-discovery isn't a destination. It's a journey that requires patience, self-reflection, and honesty. In my personal relationships, I started to recognize the importance of healthy boundaries. I had always been a yes person, wanting to please others, sometimes at the expense of my own well-being. But through my struggles and healing, I realized that saying yes to everyone else often meant saying no to myself. I began to be more honest with others about what I could handle and what I needed. I stopped feeling guilty about taking time for myself, and I stopped overextending myself to avoid disappointing others. Through this process, I also found the courage to make some tough decisions in my personal life. I distanced myself from relationships that drained me and surrounded myself with people who respected my boundaries and supported my growth. I learned that it's okay to walk away from people who don't respect your worth. Doing so isn't about rejection. It's about preserving your own peace and well-being. As I moved through this period of self-discovery, I realized that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean erasing the past or pretending the pain never existed. It means learning to live alongside the pain and using it as a source of strength. I still remembered the struggles I had gone through, the times I felt broken, and the moments I doubted myself. But I no longer let those moments define me. Instead, I used them to fuel my growth. The more I practiced self-compassion, the more I began to see my value. I learned to acknowledge my progress no matter how small. Whether it was getting out of bed in the morning or simply enjoying a quiet evening, I celebrated the small victories that were steps toward healing. We are often our own harshest critics, but I realized that kindness toward myself was a powerful tool in my healing process. Every day, I became a little more comfortable in my own skin. I began to trust myself more, to honor my own needs, and to accept that I was worthy of love, care, and respect, just as I was. By the time I turned 24, I had transformed in ways I hadn't expected. I wasn't the same person I had been just a couple of years ago. I had learned to be comfortable in my own company, to embrace solitude without feeling lonely, and to prioritize my well-being without guilt. I no longer based my self-worth on the opinions of others or on my achievements. I had learned that my value was intrinsic, and I had started living my life from a place of inner peace, not external validation. I had also learned the importance of giving myself grace. I was no longer striving for perfection. I knew that I would make mistakes, that I would stumble, and that some days would be harder than others. But I no longer saw those as failures. I saw them as opportunities to learn, to grow, and to become a stronger, more resilient person. Growth isn't about being perfect. It's about learning from your experiences and making progress. As I moved forward, I also began to see the importance of taking risks. Healing had taught me that fear, while natural, doesn't have to control me. I began to step outside of my comfort zone, taking risks in both my personal and professional life. I applied for jobs that once seemed out of my reach, and I pursued new hobbies that had always intrigued me but felt too daunting before. I realized that growth happens when we step outside our comfort zones. It's when we face our fears and take those first steps into the unknown that we truly begin to change. By the time I graduated from college, I was in a much better place mentally and emotionally. I had learned that life is not a race. There's no deadline for healing, no timeline for success. Everyone's journey is different, and we all have our own pace. I stopped comparing my progress to others and started embracing my own path. I had learned that life isn't about the destination. It's about how we show up every day, how we treat ourselves and others, and how we continue to grow no matter the challenges we face. If there's one lesson I learned from this entire journey, it's this: you are enough. You are worthy of love, respect, and kindness, no matter what you've been through. Your worth is not determined by the approval of others or by your achievements. It's inherent in who you are. And when you learn to believe that, everything else falls into place. In the end, I realized that the challenges I faced weren't the end of my story. They were the beginning of a new chapter. A chapter where I learned to embrace my imperfections, to honor my needs, and to move forward with strength and confidence. Life will always have its ups and downs, but I now know that I have the resilience, the tools, and the inner strength to face whatever comes my way. So, to anyone reading this who might be struggling or feeling lost, know that you are not alone. Healing takes time, but every step forward, no matter how small, is a victory. Be kind to yourself, take care of yourself, and remember that you are enough, just as you are.